OK, this is what Chancellor Jeremy Hunt had to say this morning on Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC.
Well, I can confirm it will be, yes. And there's two very important things I would say about that. When we came to office in 2010, pensioners were more likely to be in poverty than other income groups. Now, because of the triple lock that we introduced, they are less likely to be in poverty. And I think that's a very important social change because unlike adults of working age, pensioners can't work, they've retired, and so we need to respect that. But the second thing I would say is that is an expensive commitment.
It's a very expensive
and you
commitment.
can only, and indeed, and you can only make that commitment if you're confident that you're going to deliver the economic growth that's going to pay for it. And what we saw in the budget was, because we have a plan for growth, the OBR say that we will get back to 2%-ish growth over the next few years. That means that we can start to make that very important commitment.
But I want to be completely clear on this. You've said it will be in the manifesto, the triple lock. Will it be in the Tory manifesto that it will be in place to protect pensioners' incomes for the whole duration of the next Parliament if the Conservatives were to surprise the polls and actually turn things around?
Absolutely. We make that commitment to pensioners, and we think it's a very important one.
It's about 11 billion quid. Someone's just said that if we stop paying for illegal migration and foreign aid, and before you mentioned there is no such thing as soft power, just foreign governments get personally rich. I think, I'm not quite sure where that came from, Neil, but you're basically saying if we stop paying for illegal migration and foreign aid, you can keep the triple lock. The only person who said it isn't affordable, actually, was me. The Chancellor seems to think it is affordable, as you heard him saying there, speaking about the triple lock. So what's behind this? It's politics that's behind this. But how much does this matter to the pensioner vote? And joining me now to talk about that, Sarah Coles, personal finance analyst from Hargreaves Lansdown. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Hi. Sarah, I think the politics are obvious. There's going to be a lot of votes hopefully garnered for the Conservatives here. I'm not sure this will do it, but that's their plan. I mean, is it actually the right thing to do to lock us into a bill that we don't really know how much it's going to cost every year to uplift the state pension?
I think if you go back to why it happened in the first place, so Jeremy Hunt there talking about introducing it in 2010, and back then, pensioner poverty was a bigger problem than it is now. And so when it was introduced, the whole idea was it would keep pace with inflation, or wages, or 2.5%, whatever was the highest. So the idea was in years of low inflation, it would get more generous. And that's exactly what's happened since then. We've seen it gradually get more generous for pensioners in those years where inflation has been lower. It will, as a result of that, purely but as a result of the way that it works, at some point it's going to get to the stage where it's incredibly generous, where you're paying pensioners more than you're paying working people, purely because of the way that it functions. So there will be a point at some stage where it's just not able to function anymore.
So just for our listeners' benefit, clarify, if you can, what the triple lock is and what it kind of means for pensions, because we've had some big rises in the last couple of years, haven't we? Because it's linked to CPI, right?
Exactly. So the inflation link that's in place means that, when inflation is the strongest thing, then that's what it's linked to. When wages are the strongest thing, then that's what it's linked to. So as you say, over the last couple of years, so last April, we saw it go up slightly over 10%. This April, it's going to go up 8.5%. And those are really chunky rises. Now, to be completely fair to pensioners, that's only making up for lost time. So a lot of people will look at inflation now and say, well, we've got inflation at less than 4% now, and we're seeing this rise of 8%. So that seems a bit generous. But they're forgetting that for a year now, pensioners have been sort of watching their state pension shrink, waiting for this rise. So it's actually they're playing catch up. So I think in times of high inflation, I don't think anybody is arguing that pensions shouldn't keep pace with inflation. The big question is whether we can afford that third lock, that triple lock, that means it gets more generous in years of low inflation because it automatically rises by 2.5% when inflation is lower than that and when wages are lower than that. So it's a difficult question. And part of the issue here is that in order to pay for what is a very expensive promise, there is always the risk that you're going to get a rise in the state pension age. So we've seen that rise, and there's a lot of talk at the moment about how much it would have to rise to be affordable. And if you look at the number of people who are paying taxes per pensioner. If you were to keep it the same as it is now, then by 2050, you would need a pension, a sort of state pension age of 71. And then you start asking the question of, well, who actually can work that long? When you've got sort of the average age that people first start to get ill when they get older is round about 63 or 64. So why should they then have to work another 8 years just to maintain this triple lock?
Why should we? And someone like me, who's, you know, I've worked hard, but I've also had a bit of luck. So realistically, I am not going to depend on the state pension. That money, some of it could go back to the exchequer. More of it could have been dispensed to those who are in need. Shouldn't we be considering means testing?
It's a very difficult thing to do. Any change that you make to pension, I mean, you only have to look at this change that happened with the sort of WASPy women group. Any change that you make to pensions, people will have built their retirement plans around having a state pension. And it is incredibly difficult to say to people, we're sort of going to whip this away. You know, at the moment, the state pension is over £11,000 a year. And if you're looking at taking that away from people, there'll be so many people who've built it into their plans that they will have a state pension alongside their private pension.
But we did take away, didn't we? Sorry to cut you off there, Sarah. I mean, the government can do it. In the Cameron Osborne years, they delayed the pension for people, not just the dramatic WASPy effect, but, you know, someone in my age group who was well over 50, it was delayed by a year, but other people have to wait longer. I think my wife has to wait till 67. So they can make difficult decisions, can't they?
Yes, and I think one of the questions there you do need to ask is how late they can push that state pension before you get to the stage where nobody is claiming it. I mean, part of the problem is that, you know, if we were to say to people, right, well, the state pension is protected because it's really important and it's got to be this generous. But what you actually end up with is a lot of people who can't work to state pension age and therefore are relying on benefits at sort of in their mid-60s when they would have been relying on the pension. They now have to rely on lot less generous benefits. So you get this odd peculiarity where you're sort of building the walls higher around the state pension and then moving it further away to make it harder to get.
Just one other point, though. The statistic that floors me every time, and I mentioned this in the first hour, is that we're playing catch-up compared to our European neighbours. We're still the lowest, aren't we, state pension? I may have that wrong, but I know we're not way up in the top 5.
And I think, you know, internationally, the comparisons are really tricky. And there are a lot of people who haven't sort of gone and used a pensions calculator. I would really recommend anybody of any age has a play with a pensions calculator, because you might be thinking, well, I'm automatically enrolled into my workplace pension, I'm going to get a state pension, I should be fine. But actually, until you do the maths, it's difficult to know exactly where you stand. And you might have a really horrible shock at that point thinking, well, you know, I have to take a real cut in my current standard of living in order to be able to afford to live off this particular sum of money. So I really would recommend, there's lots of pension calculators online. Just go and put the numbers in of what you've saved so far and just see whether you're on track.
I mean, I think you can probably scare us all rather well here before I let you go. But the average size of a pension pot in this country, and I know averages cannot be that helpful, it is very low, isn't it? Is it something like £25,000-30,000?
It is, and what the thing that you know.
And you're going to get just to clarify, you're not going to get a big pension out of that, are you?
Oh, absolutely not. No, and you're not going to get a pension that provides you with the standard of living you're expecting out of it. But as you say, the difference between sort of people who are retired now on sort of final salary pensions, which guarantee your income, and then those people who maybe didn't take advantage, weren't part of auto enrolment until they're quite later on in life, may have gone huge long time without having any pension payments at all, don't have a final salary pension. And that sort of forgotten generation in the middle, I think when we get to the point where those people are retiring, a lot of them will be very, very reliant on the state pension. And that's the point at which, you know, if you're having to wait till your 70s to get it at that point, it could be a real income issue for people unless we sort of tackle the triple lock issue, you know, sooner rather than later and face facts about what can be affordable.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Personal finance, Sarah Coles, analyst from Hargreaves Lansdown.